and the Ukraine?
Ukraine has been having a relationship with the IMF for quite some time, from the late 1990s. This connection is not a temporary one. In other words, it's not as if you have a balance of payments problem and you go to the IMF for a temporary loan and then you put your economy in order and you pay back the loan. It was not that kind of an arrangement. The loan that Ukraine and many other Eastern European countries took from the IMF was really quite unpayable. And even now, the debt they have to the IMF and to others together is something which I was saying earlier is really quite unpayable. They cannot really pay back that kind of debt, particularly when their productive apparatus is not really generating much. So that was going on. So the IMF at one point, therefore, insisted that in order to continue with the debt, Ukraine has to meet certain conditionalities. In these conditionalities, it wanted a reduction in the real wage. It wanted a curtailment in the government's welfare expenditures, particularly on education and healthcare. It also wanted a cutback in subsidies. You see, in Ukraine, the government has been providing substantial subsidies on gas, which is made available to all domestic consumers. In the absence of government subsidies, there would be very high gas prices and people would really suffer greatly. And that is when Yanukovych, who was the president of Ukraine at that time, said that, no, this is something which is not possible. So at that point, therefore, IMF decided that if the conditions are not being met, in that case, it's not going to provide any more loans to Ukraine. That's when Yanukovych decided that he would try and get some loan from Russia. Yanukovych started negotiating with Russia.
And how do the Maidan Square demonstrations fit into all this?
The moment it became clear that Yanukovych is not going to be accepting the loan from the IMF, demonstrations began. But this loan was also linked to the trade negotiations with the European Union. So when the IMF loan fell through, trade negotiations with the European Union also fell through. And that is when demonstrations started occurring in Maidan Square against Yanukovych.
So then after the Yanukovych government was toppled and the government changed hands in 2014, comment on what happened to stumbling blocks the Yanukovych administration had put up against the IMF. I'm thinking here of the unwillingness to accept loan conditionalities that you mentioned earlier, prominently the unwillingness of Yanukovych to cut government subsidies on Ukrainian gas provided to domestic consumers, or the Ukrainian people. So in other words, cut public spending that served a broad public interest by keeping the cost of living down. So comment on what the new government did when it came in.
Firstly, it slashed the gas subsidy by half. Therefore, gas prices went up for the consumers. Secondly, there was a ban on the sale of land area in Ukraine to big capital, to foreigners and so on, even under Yanukovych. And that had been one of the things demanded by the IMF, that the ban should go. And immediately when the government came in, that ban went. So you had the opening up of Ukraine, not just Ukrainian resources, but even land area, to the penetration of foreign capital, foreign big capital.
It was under these conditions, then, where Ukraine's new government embraced investor-friendly policies that the IMF loan went through. To cite your article, that loan had some notable features. In your words, one, The loan was huge, much larger, in fact, more than 6 times, than what the IMF normally would provide in a comparable situation. 2, it was given to a country in the midst of a civil war, which is against usual IMF practice. And 3, it was known from the very beginning that the loan could not possibly be paid back, so that the only means through which it would be sought to be recovered would be through metropolitan capital taking control of the country's land area and mineral resources, the most prominent of which is natural gas.